Hello and welcome to this online lesson. My name is Mr. Hoven, and today we're going to be looking at factors of production and the strategies some of these big businessmen, these entrepreneurs use to make millions. And let's go ahead and get started. So, factors of production. During the late 1800s, new technology, transportation, and business methods allowed the country to tap into its rich supply of natural resources and increase production. There was a shift from an agricultural society to now this greater industrial society, and industrialization, as it expanded, needed certain things in order to grow. The first factor of production, so number one, was land. Refers to not just land itself, but all the natural resources that go along with land. And the United States held a variety of natural resources that were useful for industrial production. The second factor for production is labor. Large numbers of workers were needed to turn raw materials into goods. This need was met by rapid population growth. And between 1860 and 1900, the population of the country more than doubled. And the third and final factor of production is capital, which are the manufactured goods used to make other goods and services. The machines, buildings, and tools used to assemble automobiles, for example, are capital goods. Another thing that you can think of with capital is money. So, in order to raise capital, companies needed a way to get the products, get the machines, and also get the money. So, one way a company could raise capital was by becoming a corporation, which is a company that sells shares of its stock, which are of its business, to the public. Investors, known as shareholders, buy the stock in a company and become partial owners of that company. During the periods of strong economic growth, shareholders earn dividends, which would be cash payments for their investment. So when the country succeeds, the shareholder gets a little bit of a money kickback. However, there is a big danger with this. If the company fails, the shareholders lose their investment. All of their money is gone. The growth of corporations helped fuel America's industrial expansion. And the first example of a corporation were the railroads. Banks helped out, letting businesses start through lending money to businesses for business loans. So, another industry that had a huge growth was the oil business in the late 1800s. This grew rapidly. And John Rockefeller, who was the most famous individual in the oil industry, when he was 26 years old, he and 4 partners or associates agreed to operate a business together, built an oil refinery, a plant to process oil in Cleveland, Ohio. He organized the Standard Oil Company and set out to dominate the oil industry. His goal was to be the most powerful and richest man in the United States. One method he used was horizontal integration. This was combining competing companies into one corporation. So combining multiple independent oil refineries into the one U.S. or the Standard Oil Company. Standard Oil became very powerful and wealthy. Again, laissez-faire, no government infringement on the big business, helped Rockefeller build his empire. Now, again, because there's no government intervention, these big business owners can kind of do as they please. So some of these tactics Rockefeller used to eliminate his competitors might seem a little dirty. He lowered prices to drive his competitors out of business. Once he did that, and he was the sole producer of oil, he jacked the prices up to make the public pay more. He pressured his customers not to deal with rival companies, and he persuaded the railroads to give him lower rates. Again, no laissez-faire, no government intervention. He's kind of doing whatever he pleases to eliminate his competition. Now, in 1882, he formed a trust, which is a group of companies managed by the same board of directors. He did this by acquiring stock in many different oil companies. The shareholders of these companies traded their stock for Standard Oil stock because it paid higher dividends. Again, it yielded more cash for their investment. As a result, the Standard Oil became part owner of other companies. Rockefeller created a monopoly, which was total control of the oil industry. Keep in mind, monopoly is something important, having entire control over an industry. So Rockefeller, controlled the oil industry. He had a monopoly on the oil industry. So now, there wasn't just the oil industry that was booming at this time. The steel industry grew as well. It exploded in the late 1800s with the addition and the invention of the Bessemer process, which was a new process which turned iron ore into steel. It allowed for the mass production of steel, which led to more affordable prices for consumers. Pittsburgh, PA, or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, became the steel capital of the United States. So for those of you football fans who wonder how did the Pittsburgh Steelers get their name, it's because the 1800s, Pittsburgh was the steel capital of the U.S. Now, the entrepreneur who really invested and really put a lot of his money and taking a financial risk into the steel company was Andrew Carnegie. He became the leading figure for the steel industry in the late 1800s. He began as the son of a Scottish immigrant when he was a young kid, and he worked his way up as he grew up to the manager of the Pennsylvania Railroad. In 1865, he invested in the growing iron industry. He soon realized that there was an enormous market for steel. And after learning about the Bessemer process, he built his first steel plant near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, Carnegie Steel grew rapidly. By 1890, Carnegie dominated the steel industry. His company became powerful through vertical integration. If you remember, we talked about horizontal integration with the oil industry. So vertical integration is acquiring companies that provide the equipment and services needed for an industry. So he would buy up not just more steel mills, but he bought up the iron and coal mines, which produced it. He bought up warehouses to house the iron and steel and make the steel. He bought up ore ships to transport iron and railroads to gain control of all parts of the business of making and selling steel. And if you look on this slide, you can see the vertical integration of meat or of meat production. So again, vertical integration, you have control over every part of creating a product. By 1900, Carnegie Steel was producing 1/3 of the nation's, the United States, steel. Huge, huge moneymaker. Now, with laissez-faire, corporations were allowed to grow. Monopolies, trusts, kind of underhanded business tactics, all were allowed to happen. And this often came at the expense of the everyday person. In the late 1800s, states began passing laws to help big business, give them more power. Mergers, or combining of companies, were encouraged by a lot of states, especially New Jersey. Many people admired big business and big businessmen, but more argued that the lack of competition hurt consumers. Because as you have corporations and monopolies, there's less competition. When there is competition, prices are driven down because the people producing the good, the oil or the steel, they want you to buy their product, not their competition's, so they might lower the price a little bit. It helps out the consumer. With no competition, such as what Rockefeller did, he would come in, undercut all of his competitors. When they went out of business, he jacked the price up. No one's competing with him, so he can set the price wherever he wants. Again, government not intervening, laissez-faire, hands off, it's hurting the consumers. Because without competition, like I said, corporations, no reason to keep prices low. And by 1890, people started wisening up, and Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, which prohibited trusts and monopolies. We're going to look over the next few days in class at the idea of a monopoly, of a trust, of vertical and horizontal integration. Wrong unit. We're also going to take a look at mergers and different things that big business owners did to make money and eliminate competition. We'll also kind of look into how did the workers get treated in all this? What was factory life like for the women, children, and men that were working? I hope you enjoyed this online lesson, and we'll see you next time.